Today on Alex Autos, we're out here in the forest taking a look at the Volvo V60 Cross Country. This is not a XC60 because the XC60 is of course the taller crossover vehicle from Volvo. This is more of a crossover station wagon. Versus the V60, we get a new grille. This is sort of Volvo's off-road looking grille, kind of an egg crate design. We do have the radar sensor right over here on this side. That's what this blank section is for. Unfortunately, versus the regular Volvo grille, they can't really paint this design on this sensor to hide it a little bit better, so it does stick out just a little bit more. Our model has front parking sensors, and we also have the steering HID headlamps. While some people have complained about Volvo headlamps in the past, Volvo's latest headlamps are incredibly bright. These are bi-xenon headlamps, which means the same beam is used for high beam and low beam. It removes a shutter to actually extend the light up above. These also steer in the corners, and they steer more than most of the competition. In addition, this headlamp module also uses a halogen high beam that is separate, and that does not steer, but does actually increase the light going forward. It's important to keep in mind that the mission for the V60 Cross Country is not quite the same as the XC60, so we don't have quite the ride height that we get in that more dedicated crossover vehicle, although this is decently higher than the V60. As you'd expect from a vehicle with off-roading in mind, we do have slightly more off-road oriented wheels and tires. These are still 18-inch wheels, but they are 50 series tires, and that means that we have a little bit more rubber here to help cushion the ride. The V60 is in general a relatively firm ride, however, and that is important to keep in mind. The XC60 is going to be softer. It's going to be a little bit more suitable for high-speed travel on rough roads. This is a little bit closer to the regular V60 wagon. It's a little bit sportier. This is the kind of vehicle you want to drive if you live down a gravel road like I live down, but you also take a very fun winding mountain road to work. You'll have an awful lot more fun in this than in the XC60. The V60 Cross Country is almost exactly the same size as the regular old V60. In fact, the only dimension that's really changed is the ride height and the overall vehicle height because it's a little bit higher off the ground. That means we still get this more dynamic side profile than you'll find in the V70 or XC70. The V70 and XC70 are much more traditional Volvo shaped than this vehicle. It's most noticeable right back here in the rear. The V70 and XC70 are based off of Volvo's large S80 sedan, and that's why we get much more room in the back. But also, the XC70 and the V70 are much more square in the back than this vehicle, really giving you more cargo practicality. This is a much sexier design, however. This is also a little bit of an optical illusion because the roofline does not really plunge as drastically to the rear as it looks, but the door opening does plunge to the rear, so it makes it a little bit harder for tall passengers to get in and out of the vehicle, but once they're inside, they will find adequate headroom. Out back, the styling is very similar to the V60 wagon, but we do get a few cross-country unique parts, like down here lower on the bumper where it says cross country. We get some unique treatments right around here, right near the integrated exhaust tips. All V60 cross-country models do get these twin integrated trapezoidal exhaust tips. That's because we have the same engine in all V60 cross-country models. A nice touch in the rear are these twin light pipes that highlight this very Volvo hip shape on the rear. Instead of the varied engine lineup we get under the hood of the S60 and the V60, there's only one engine in the V60 Cross Country. It is this 2.5-liter 5-cylinder turbocharged engine. This engine produces 250 horsepower and 266 pound-feet of torque, which compares very well to the German competition. It also has an overboost feature, which allows it to produce almost 300 pound-feet of torque for up to 10 seconds at a time. This engine is mated to a 6-speed automatic transmission only and a Haldex-based all-wheel drive system, which can send up to 50% of the power to the rear, assuming that there is no wheel slip up front. As a result of the standard all-wheel drive system and this older 6-speed automatic transmission and the older engine design, fuel economy is definitely not as high as you'll find in the front-wheel drive versions of the V60 wagon. Fuel economy is also a little bit lower than Audi's A4 wagon-based Allroad. A 5-cylinder engine may sound a little funny, but it makes perfect sense. 5-cylinder engines are considerably smoother than a 4-cylinder engine, but not quite as smooth as a 6-cylinder engine. They're also a little bit more efficient than a 6-cylinder engine, but not quite as efficient as a 4, and that's why they're used by Volvo and a number of other auto manufacturers. The downside, of course, is engine length and, of course, that efficiency score, that it's not quite as efficient as a 4-cylinder engine, and that's why Volvo is actually moving to an all 4-cylinder lineup in the coming few years. If you want to know more about cylinder counts and why they exist, go ahead and click that video link at the bottom of the screen. We've taken on over to a video explaining that. As I've come to expect from Volvo, front seat comfort is exceptional. We have a tilt telescopic steering column with a very large range of motion. This has a much larger range of motion than you'll find in many vehicles out there. Makes it easier for drivers of different shapes to find an ideal driving position. We have a multi-way power memory driver's seat on our particular model, and Volvo now has a two-way adjustable lumbar support that is powered. It's kind of a novelty for Volvo. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to give this 9 out of 10 points because I would prefer a four-way adjustable lumbar support, and this lumbar support switch is in kind of an awkward position. However, if you're the average size driver, then these are probably the most comfortable seats in this category. If you're stepping up from something like a Subaru Outback, these seats are notably more comfortable. They're also notably more bolstered, so they're not quite as wide. Larger drivers may find that an issue. If you're stepping across from something like an Audi Allroad to the V60 Cross Country, then you will notice these seats are a little bit more comfortable than you'll find in that Audi. The B-pillars in Volvo vehicles have long been very beefy because of their dedication to side impact protection. However, it does cause a little bit of a problem ergonomically with the seat controls. Now that this model has a power lumbar support, you can see where Volvo added it, and it's right back here at the very back of the seat. It's quite far from the regular seat controls. It means it's a little bit more difficult to get to that lumbar control because you do have to stick your hand between this B-pillar and the seat. That is kind of tight. When it comes to the rear seats, I'm going to give this 7 out of 10 points for adults. That's because we have relatively limited legroom back here, especially if I slide over to the right side of the vehicle where I had this front seat adjusted for a 6'5" driver. The problem is mostly in the footwell. While I do have a little bit of room for my knees, I don't really have a whole lot of room for my feet. This has long been a problem with Volvo's 60 series vehicles. That would be the S60, the V60, and this V60 Cross Country. If you do need more room in the back, you will find definitely more in the XC70. Moving over to the middle seat, I still have an adequate amount of room, but more importantly, I definitely have an awful lot of headroom back here. So I have about an inch, even though the center seat is a little bit higher off the ground than the outboard seats. Now, when making your comparisons, it is important to remember that the XC70 is priced about the same as the Audi Allroad and some of those other options. So it's right around the same price as this V60 Cross Country. So if you are looking for something with a little bit more room and you're willing to trade a little bit of the handling ability, then that is definitely an option, and you'll find more room in that vehicle than you will in something like the A4 wagon. Cargo practicality has long been a Volvo strong suit, and that's true in this vehicle as well. We have this rear seat back that folds completely flat, and we don't have to move this seat bottom cushion in order to do that. It just folds flat all by itself, and it is completely flat with the cargo area in the rear. In addition to that, we have some of Volvo's more innovative cargo management solutions, like this net that pops right up out of the seat back, and you can clip that in two places. You can actually clip it right here, right behind the driver and the front passenger, or right back here behind the rear seats. So you can keep cargo in its place in the back, or even when these rear seats are folded and you have larger items in the vehicle. Let's start out our interior tour up front. We have these fixed position headrests for both the driver and the front passenger, and we have these new height adjustable seat belts up front as well. These are a little bit different than Volvo's seat belts in the past, where you had to pull the seat belt out and then reel it back in at a particular height to adjust the height. What we have here is a little bit more similar to every other entry in this segment. In kind of an interesting twist, all V60 Cross Country models get these standard sport seats. They are optional in the regular V60, and it does give you additional bolstering on the side cushion and on the bottom cushion. Moving over to the front door, we find mainly soft touch plastics. You won't find hard touch plastics until you explore the inner area of this little compartment right here. One thing to note, however, is that the S60 and the V60 are not terribly long vehicles, although they are four-door sedans. And you'll notice that right here on this armrest and where this B-pillar is located. This front seat is almost all the way back in its tracks, suitable for a taller driver, and you'll notice the armrest really comes quite far forward of where the person's elbow would be. That's just because of the size of this vehicle. These doors can't be quite as large as you'll find in the next size class up. Moving over to the dashboard, we have essentially the same dashboard as you'll find in the S60 sedan. We have a large glove compartment if we open that up, large compartment right there, and then a small pocket right in the front. Our model has the optional up-level Harman Kardon sound system, so we do get a center channel speaker nice and high on the dashboard. Lower in the dashboard, you find a 7-inch LCD that contains Volvo's Sensus Connect infotainment system. If you want to know more about this system, go ahead and click that banner at the bottom of your screen. You'll be taken on over to my dedicated infotainment review. Some basic things to know about the system are that we do have the usual navigation software with a 3D view and topographical information, Sirius XM satellite radio, as well as AM and FM radio. We also have a dedicated iPod interface, USB interface, Bluetooth telephone. This is also where you can change vehicle settings. The big change for 2015 and a half is that we now have all of these online services that you see right here. That's because we have a built-in cell modem in this system. And all these services are operating off that cell modem. So for instance, Pandora and the radio and other services, those are all actually using the built-in cell modem in the system. So there's no need for a paired smartphone to enjoy those services. To the left of that screen, we have our start-stop button. If you do not get the keyless go system, you do have to put the key in this slot right here. Moving down the dashboard, we have a large air vent right here. It is interestingly placed because in previous generations of this vehicle, we used to have a small infotainment readout right here. Single disc, optical disc player right there, and then below that we have the controls for that Volvo Sensus Connect system. One of the things that makes Sensus Connect very unique is that you can control the system from this little scroll wheel on the steering wheel. We also have an exit button right there, and you click it down to OK, or you can use this control knob right here on the dashboard. And it does allow you to actually change everything in the system right here from the steering wheel while you're in motion. Taking a closer look at the center console, we have our power and volume knob right over here. Again, that scroll knob and menu knob right on that side. We have a dedicated phone keypad right here. This is also used for radio presets, etc. Dedicated buttons for nav, radio, media, telephone, and the online services, etc. Moving the shifter out of the way, you can see the controls for the dual zone climate control. They're very intuitive. You just stab the area of the body you want the air to go to. We have our auto button right there, temperature knob, heated seat buttons right there. Below it, you'll find some other buttons for this vehicle. We have hill descent control in our particular model, parking sensor enable disable button. This gives you information on how close you are to the vehicle in front of you. Lane departure warning, heated steering wheel button, recline the rear headrests, and engage or disengage the different park view cameras. We do have a rear view or a front view camera available. Like many of Volvo's recent models, the center panel is sort of floating, and you can put things in a little storage cubby right behind it. We have a very traditional shifter in our model now. This replaces the translucent shifter that Volvo had for a short while. Down for drive, across for sport, and then up for up and down for down. Putting that shifter back in place and going behind it, we have two very large cup holders. This is also where you'll find the 12-volt power outlet. These were easily able to accommodate the largest takeout drinks I was able to throw at them. Again, owing to the small relative size of the 60 series vehicles from Volvo, we have a small center armrest. It opens to reveal a relatively small compartment. We have a few miscellaneous knickknacks in there. This is also where you'll find the USB input and the auxiliary input for that infotainment system. Moving over to the driver's side, we have Volvo's new LCD instrument cluster in this particular model. This is not quite as snazzy as the one you'll find in the brand new 2016 Volvo XC90. This is the one you'll find in most Volvo models on dealer lots. This is mildly user configurable. We have three different themes to choose from. That's the elegance theme, we also have an eco theme right there, and then we also have a performance theme, which will change everything to red, give you a digital speedometer, and a very large tachometer. In both the Eco and the Elegance themes, we have some nice touches right here. So this little red dot right up there indicates your speed limit. If I turned on the radar cruise control, it would also indicate your set speed as well as the speed of the vehicle in front of you. You can see the display does change depending on which options are enabled or disabled on the vehicle. So if I turn off the lane departure monitoring system, you'll notice that we get a much larger needle right there and some of the color background shows up. Again, if we engage the radar cruise control, little Volvo icon shows up there as well. You can also rotate through your trip computer, which happens on either side of that large central dial. Volvo doesn't say exactly what wood species this is in our V60 Cross Country interior, but they do say that it is real wood. Taking a closer look at the steering wheel buttons, on the right side of the steering wheel we have our volume up, down. Again, this is the control knob for controlling that 7-inch infotainment display right there. Exit for that menu, voice command, and track forward and backward. On the other side of the steering wheel, we have our cruise control buttons. Since our model has the optional radar cruise control system, we have the following distance, increase and decrease buttons, speed up and down, resume, and enable and disable. The V60 gets one of Volvo's best steering wheels. It is sort of a 3-spoke design with this center spoke down here that has a little hole in it. Sport grips right up here and sport bump outs on the bottom of the steering wheel right over here. It's very thickly rimmed as well as thickly padded. As part of the 2015.5 infotainment refresh, Volvo has resurrected their on-call service in the United States. So you notice we have this on-call button right here and an SOS button right next to the moonroof controls. This service is very similar to General Motors' OnStar service, and it can notify emergency services in the event of an airbag deployment. You can also press this SOS button for assistance. There's certain other services that you can pay for in addition to these as well. Volvo's V60 wagon is one of the sportier vehicles in this segment, and it really applies to this V60 Cross Country as well. The suspension in this model is relatively firm. It actually was surprisingly firm to me because I was expecting something a little bit more along the lines of the XC70 rather than a little bit more on the lines of the V60. That suspension stiffness is most noticeable out on gravel roads or dirt roads, which is supposed to be the natural habitat for the V60 Cross Country. The XC70 is the vehicle you want to drive if your commute involves a long distance on dirt roads or gravel roads or bumpy roads, whereas the V60 and the V60 Cross Country are more the kinds of vehicle you want to drive if you live on a gravel road, but you commute a long distance on very fun winding mountain roads. It's kind of a different concept. Now, when you compare the V60 Cross Country with your average luxury crossover, the V60 handles incredibly well. There's a lot less body roll. The suspension is a great deal firmer. It's also a little bit lower to the ground, so we don't get quite the ground clearance that you get in that next step up. That, of course, means that the V60 Cross Country is much more of the driver's vehicle out on the road than any of those other options out there, even though we have that BMW X3 available in rear-wheel drive. When it comes to acceleration, I ran from 0 to 60 in 6.4 seconds when this vehicle was in sport mode. Volvo has actually changed the transmission programming a little bit this year, and sport mode now makes the shifts noticeably faster and noticeably firmer in this vehicle. It actually improves the 0 to 60 time by about 1/4 of a second versus being in drive mode, where you have much softer shifts. Now, 6.4 seconds isn't exceptionally fast, but it does put this right in the meat of this segment. So this is very similar in terms of acceleration to the BMW 3 Series GT with their 2-liter turbo engine, very similar to the X3 with the 2-liter turbo as well, very similar to the Audi Allroad that's sold in the United States also. I'm going to give handling 9 out of 10 points because, again, as I said, this does road hold incredibly well for an off-road all-wheel drive type vehicle. Now, this doesn't have quite the same off-roading ability as you'll find in that compact crossover vehicle in this segment, especially with the higher ground clearance models. Of course, that handling score comes with a price, and that price is the ride score out on these bumpy roads that we're on right here. You can have an awful lot of fun in your V60 out on a bumpy road, but if you do, you may end up with bruised kidneys. Cabin noise is excellent, even though this is a wagon model. We scored 68.5 decibels at 50 miles an hour, which is a very good score for this segment. Braking scores were quite good for this category, but there are a number of vehicles that are better than this. Braking fade resistance is excellent, but the distances could be a little bit shorter. The V60 Cross Country has been averaging about 21 miles per gallon in very mixed driving over about 600 miles. Now, while 21 miles per gallon may not sound that bad, do keep in mind that the front-wheel drive versions of Volvo's own XC60 are practically class-leading, averaging between 27 and 28 miles per gallon in my own mixed driving. And the XC60 is a much larger and bulkier vehicle, has a much larger frontal view, and therefore it has more wind resistance to it. Volvo's brand new Drive E series of engines are not compatible with Volvo's all-wheel drive system at this moment, and therefore we still get that old 5-cylinder engine up front and we get the 6-speed automatic transmission. That means we don't get the start-stop system that you find in the newer front-wheel drive Volvos or the 8-speed automatic that you also find in those vehicles. That means that you have a choice. If you want all the sporting ability but you want much better fuel economy, you can get Volvo's own V60 Drive E front-wheel drive model. You won't get all-wheel drive, you'll get the slightly lower suspension, but you'll get very similar handling and you'll get much better fuel economy. If I was shopping in this segment, I would honestly be very torn. If the power levels were similar, then I would take this V60 Cross Country over the XC70. However, the power levels are not equal, and you can actually get Volvo's 300 horsepower twin-scroll turbo 3-liter 6-cylinder engine in that XC70, and that is an awful lot of fun. In addition to that, you can also get the Polestar upgrade package for that same engine to give it a 25 horsepower and 50 pound-foot of torque boost, making it significantly faster than this V60 Cross Country, even though it's still not quite as stiff and doesn't handle quite as well as this. On the surface of things, pricing looks like a problem for the 2015.5 V60 Cross Country. The XC60 starts at $36,400, the XC70 starts at $36,050, and the V60 on which this is based starts at $35,950. But this car starts at $41,000. While that looks like nearly a $4,000 premium over the V60 wagon, it's important to keep in mind that the base V60 wagon does not have all-wheel drive and doesn't have all the same standard features that we get on this model. The reason for that is the XC60 model comes standard in the Premier trim, which is sort of the middle-range trim in the Volvo lineup. We also get standard sport seats and standard all-wheel drive. Now, just taking those features into account on the V60 wagon, the difference is only $40 between this and the V60 wagon. And we get standard 18-inch wheels on this model, standard 17s on that V60 wagon. If you're a fan of fully loaded wagons, then you may be a little bit disappointed by the cross-country version, because the regular V60 wagon tops out just under $57,000, but this model tops out just around $52,000. Primarily because we cannot get the 3-liter turbocharged 6-cylinder engine in this model, and you can in the V60R design. Now, as I said, all models of the cross-country V60 are basically that middle-range package. You can get the top-end Platinum package, and it will include a few features that you can also get optionally on this model, but it's a slightly better deal in that trim. That would be the Technology package, which includes the radar cruise control system and also upgrades city safety to pedestrian and cyclist detection. That package also makes keyless go and a backup camera standard, which are normally part of a convenience package, and the Harman Kardon up-level audio system is also included. Now those options are available separately on the trim we're looking at right here. The Technology package is $1,500, the convenience package is $1,500, and that Harman Kardon sound system is $1,200. So it's a better deal to get that upper level trim rather than adding those packages on extra. The Technology package is definitely an option that I would get because of the radar cruise control system and the augmentation of the standard city safety system to add the pedestrian detection and the cyclist detection. You can also get those booster seats in the back for children for $500, and you can get the heated everything package for $1,550. Of course, Volvo doesn't call it a heated everything package, they call it the climate package, but what it gives you is a heated steering wheel, heated front and rear seats, and an electric heated front windshield. If you live in an area of the country affected by the snowpocalypse of 2015, you may find this a very handy feature. Unlike most cars that have to heat the engine, heat the air, and then blow that hot air on the windscreen and hope that it will defrost your windscreen, this actually has a very small electric grid in the windshield, just like the rear window, that will actually heat the glass itself and really cut down the defrost time. Now, if you need maximum defogging or defrosting, you can turn on the air defogger as well as the electric grid in the windshield. Now, if you live in an area that's not terribly cold, you can get the heated bits in the interior separately from the heated windscreen. That may be an option you might want to select because it does, of course, make windshield replacements a little bit more expensive, and in certain lighting conditions, you can see the electric grid in the windscreen. True competition for the V60 Cross Country is very limited. In fact, other than Volvo's own XC70, the only other lifted wagon in this luxury category is Audi's Allroad. The Allroad is essentially an A4 wagon that's been lifted up a little bit and had some off-road cladding added, just like this wagon. The Allroad is between $1,500 and $3,000 more expensive than the V60 Cross Country when you configure them relatively similarly. Now, obviously, not all the options align perfectly, but it's going to be in that relative range. In some ways, the Allroad splits the difference between the V60 Cross Country and Volvo's XC70. The Audi is a little bit larger on the inside, but not as large as Volvo's XC70. It's also a little bit softer out on the road than this, but not quite as soft as Volvo's XC70. This is actually the better handling option between the two vehicles, the Audi and the Volvo. Now, interestingly enough, depending on the obstacles you will encounter out on the road, this actually may be the better vehicle off-road as well, because we get a slightly shorter front overhang just because of the way Volvo's drivetrain is laid out versus Audi's drivetrain. While performance is neck and neck between this and the Audi Allroad, there is a clear and away winner in this segment, and that is the XC70. With that turbocharged 6-cylinder engine, it is definitely faster than this and faster than the Audi, even though it still gets a 6-speed automatic. Now, when it comes down to the finer details, I think both cabins look very nice on the inside. I find these seats a little bit more comfortable than the Audis up front, a little bit less comfortable in the back. They're both very practical on the inside, but I think that this navigation system, even though it doesn't look quite as nice as MMI, is actually a little bit more functional. Volvo has their new connected app, as well as the built-in apps and the built-in cell modem in this system. And on the Audi side, we get Google Maps, which are really pretty, but they don't offer the same kind of integration that we get in this vehicle. Now, on the downside, the screen inside the cabin is a little bit smaller than I'd like, but the LCD instrument cluster is very attractive. Now, you could obviously compare this to something like a BMW 3 Series wagon or a BMW 3 Series GT, or even the BMW X3, but those are all very different vehicles. The 3 Series wagon really competes with the V60, not the V60 Cross Country, and the X3 really competes with Volvo's XC60, not the V60 Cross Country. However, if you really must compare, then this is going to be about $1,500 to $5,000 less expensive than those BMW options, again depending on how you configure the Volvo. Now, BMW has lately been turning into the new Mercedes, and as a result you will find luxury options on the inside of the BMW that you cannot find on a Volvo at any price. However, you will pay for those options, meaning that top-end trims of those BMWs will be significantly more expensive than this. I know a lot of people love to compare Volvo and Subaru, but it's important to keep in mind that they're very different brands. Volvo is a luxury brand, and Subaru has said time and time again that they're trying to compete with Toyota, Honda, Ford, General Motors, etc. As a result, it should be no surprise that even though the V60's interior is aging just a little bit, it is still a much nicer place to spend your time than the Subaru Outback. You'll also find things in this interior that you won't find in the Subaru, like nicer leather, real wood trim, etc. Now we do have about the same kind of power going on in this turbocharged 2.5-liter engine as we do in the Subaru 6-cylinder engine. Now Subaru likes to make a big deal out of their all-wheel drive systems and their horizontally opposed engines. Two very interesting developments in this segment for sure. However, neither one of them is necessarily superior to what we have going on in this Volvo. That 3.6-liter horizontally opposed engine is significantly heavier than the engine in this vehicle, which means that even though it is placed lower in the vehicle than we get with this 2.5-liter 5-cylinder engine, it doesn't necessarily benefit handling in the same way. This still handles considerably better than the Outback. Now, the most noticeable difference in handling between this and the Outback is that the Outback is very front-heavy. Because of the design of the Subaru all-wheel drive system, that much larger engine is entirely in front of the front axle, and this engine is almost entirely on top of the axle. Subaru is now also using a CVT behind all of their engines, so there's no longer a stepped automatic transmission. If you prefer a stepped automatic, then this vehicle would be the one for you. Now, even though Subaru is using a CVT behind all of their engines, the fuel economy is actually a little bit lower in that 3.6-liter model than in the V60 Cross Country. You will get better fuel economy if you get the smaller engine, but you won't get the same kind of performance. Once upon a time, Subaru's 6-cylinder engines got a different all-wheel drive system that normally sent more power to the rear wheels, but that's not happening anymore. It actually is more similar to what we find in this Volvo model. The power split is actually about 60-40 front-rear under normal circumstances, and then when slip happens, it can lock a clutch pack, sending power 50-50. With both systems, assuming no wheel slip, you can get 50% of the power to the front and 50% of the power to the rear maximum. If you want to send more power to the rear, it does require that the front wheels are slipping. That's very similar to the BMW and the Mercedes systems, but different than the Audi Allroad, because the Allroad does use a torsion center differential, and that center differential normally sends power 60% to the rear, 40% to the front, unless wheel slip occurs. The V60 Cross Country seems to be targeted exactly at my demographic. If you live down a gravel road, but you drive on a really fun winding mountain road to work, then this is certainly the vehicle for you. It's not as capable off-road as something like an XC60 or an Audi Q5 or BMW X3, but it's certainly more on-road capable than those vehicles. A lot of that comes down to the stiffer suspension we get in this vehicle. It was actually surprisingly stiff, I thought. I was expecting something a little bit softer, a little bit more like the Volvo XC70, but that's not what's going on in this vehicle. Personally, I think the V60 Cross Country is the best version of the V60 wagon, excluding that V60R design. If you're looking at the regular or mid-grade forms of the regular V60 wagon, you should definitely give the Cross Country a try. You really don't lose much in terms of handling, but you do gain a little bit of additional off-road prowess. I think the exterior is very attractive as well. Unless you need the additional cargo carrying capacity you'll find in the XC60, the X3, and the Q5, then you may want to give this a look instead of those options, because this will handle significantly better, but it will also give you better fuel economy. My bottom line with the V60 Cross Country is that this is definitely a vehicle that I like. However, I think that I would actually buy the XC70 instead. The XC70 is a little bit larger than this on the inside especially, but we also have the option of a much more powerful engine, which I really like. Now, if you're looking at the base forms, I would definitely get this over the base engine in that XC70, but I would definitely get the XC70 T6 over this V60 Cross Country. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this has been the 2015.5 XC60 Cross Country. Go ahead and click that subscribe button at the bottom of your screen, and you'll be updated on all of my latest videos. You can also find some additional videos on my channel. There are buttons down there as well. You can find me over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, over at Twitter as AlexNautos, and you can email your questions to alex@alexnautos.com. I'll see you next week.